the Zero fighter, a symbol of absolute air supremacy. But what if its brilliant design was also its death sentence? This is the story of a bargain, where for every pound of speed, engineers paid with armor, and for phenomenal agility, with the pilot's life. The story of how a perfect blade, forged for a knight's duel, became a fragile toy in a merciless war. We will follow the path where an engineering masterpiece becomes a coffin, and we will ask the ultimate question: at what point does a creation, designed to elevate a warrior, become the instrument of his predestined sacrifice? October 5th, 1937. In the quiet offices of the Imperial Japanese Navy, a document is born. Not an order, not a directive, a challenge. The 12 Shu specification. On paper, just dry numbers, but between the lines, a demand for a miracle. A carrier-based fighter that could reach 500 kilometers per hour, climb to 3,000 meters in 3.5 minutes, and still stay airborne for 8 hours, covering a distance of 3,000 kilometers. Speed, agility, range. 3 gods of war that never arrived together. To provide one, engineers always had to take away another. But the Navy demanded all 3. At the same time, in one plane. It was so audacious, it seemed absurd. A contradiction of the very laws of aerodynamics. And where others saw an unsolvable equation, one man saw a way. Jiro Horikoshi, chief designer for Mitsubishi. To him, weight wasn't just an engineering spec, it was original sin, an absolute evil to be eradicated with the fanaticism of a surgeon removing a tumor. His team declared war, not on enemy aircraft, but on their own. They fought for every gram. They drilled holes in non-load-bearing parts of the frame, turning solid beams into delicate lace. They used thousands of flush-headed rivets to make the surface perfectly smooth. But Horikoshi's trump card was hidden in the smelting furnaces of the Sumitomo company. A secret alloy, extra super duralumin. A material from the future, which gave the engineers the right to be bold. It was lighter and stronger than anything else in the world. From this metallic marvel, they could create the thinnest, almost weightless parts that still retained incredible strength. It was this obsession with lightness that sealed the bargain no one yet understood. For the sake of speed and agility, everything that could save the pilot was stripped from the design. An armored seatback, excess weight, self-sealing fuel tanks that could absorb a puncture, an unforgivable luxury. The plane was becoming a blade, sharpened to its absolute limit, incredibly sharp but brittle. April 1st, 1939. April Fool's Day. Silence at the Kagamigahara airfield. The first prototype, the A6M is rolled onto the runway. Test pilot Katsuzo Shima climbs into the cockpit. Could this all be just a cruel joke? The impossible could not fly. But it did. The prototype lifted off the ground with ease, as if gravity didn't notice it. It was alive, obedient, lethal. On that day, Jiro Horikoshi and his team created a miracle. They had created the perfect weapon for a perfect duel. But in their pursuit of that perfection, they forgot one crucial thing. War is not a series of beautiful duels, and the price paid for every pound saved would not be measured in yen. It would be measured in human lives. The skies over Chongqing, September 13th, 1940. For the Chinese pilots, it was just another sortie. Their outdated but reliable I-15 and I-16 fighters knew these skies like the back of their hand. But on that day, something new appeared in the air. They came from nowhere. 13 silver predators. They moved with a grace that shouldn't exist. They turned on a dime. They soared upwards, as if gravity had no hold on them. The Chinese pilots, battle-hardened veterans, were trapped in a nightmare. Their own planes, so familiar and obedient, suddenly felt clumsy and slow, like oxen against a cheetah. The fight was over before it began. 27 enemy planes shot down. On the Japanese side, there were no losses. 0. On that day, a rumor became a terror, and the engineering masterpiece born of compromise showed its true face for the first time. It was the face of absolute supremacy. And this was only the beginning. A little over a year later, over the sleepy harbor of Pearl Harbor, 100 of these ghosts would sweep the skies, giving their bombers perfect conditions to strike. This was the strategic advantage Admiral Yamamoto had dreamed of, and that staff officer Minoru Genda had insisted upon, not just an escort, but a key that could unlock any defense. And just 3 days after that, another shock. Off the coast of Malaya, the British battleships Prince of Wales and Repulse, the pride of the Royal Navy, were sent to the bottom by Japanese torpedo bombers, and circling above them, driving off any attempt to resist, were the Zeros. These fighters with their unprecedented range, capable of striking where no one expected them. The age of the dreadnought was over. It ended under the shadow of the Zero's wings. A new sun had risen over the Pacific, and its rays were these machines. But an airplane is just a tool. The true creators of the legend were men, the pilots, the new samurai of the 20th century, men like Saburo Sakai or Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, nicknamed the Devil of Rabaul by his enemies. They didn't just fly the Zero, they were an extension of it. They knew their plane was a blade, not armor. They could feel the ailerons grow heavy at high speeds. They remembered that the drums of their 20mm cannons held only 60 rounds, enough for just 7 seconds of fire. Every attack had to be perfect, every movement precise. They often flew in silence. The poor quality radios were simply removed, forcing them to rely on instinct and skill, not orders from the ground. This was the era of the aerial duel, and the Zero was built for it. The result? The kill-to-loss ratio reached a staggering 12-1. For Allied pilots, an encounter with a Zero was a death sentence. It could outturn them, appear from their blind spots, strike, and vanish. The myth of the invincible sky samurai was forged in the fire of dozens of battles. The Empire believed in its samurai. It placed its bet on him. And for a time, that bet seemed to be winning. But every legend has a beginning and an end. And the brighter it shines, the more terrible the sunset will be. But for every triumph, there was a price. For every aerial victory, a bill was written. And it would be paid not by the engineers in the quiet of their offices, but by the pilots, locked in a cramped cockpit at 15,000 feet. Because this engineering masterpiece, this celestial blade, was built around a fundamental compromise, a deal with the devil of aerodynamics. Jiro Horikoshi, in casting out weight, had also cast out chance. The armored seat back that protected a pilot's spine from bullets, thrown out. The armored glass in front of his face, too many pounds. And most critically, the self-sealing fuel tanks, capable of closing a puncture like living flesh to prevent the fuel from igniting, deemed an unforgivable luxury. Every Zero rolled off the assembly line with its death sentence already built into its design. It wasn't just an airplane. It was a flying lighter. Just ask Saburo Sakai. August 7th, 1942. The skies over Guadalcanal. The great ace, one of those new samurai, attacks a group of American bombers. He gets on the tail of one, then another, and makes a mistake. He doesn't see the tail gunner. A sudden crash. Not the whistle of bullets, but the blow of a sledgehammer against the cockpit. Plexiglass shards dig into his body. A hot, sticky wave covers his face. The left side of his body is paralyzed. His right eye is gone. He sees the world only through a red haze. The enemy is gone. Sakai is alone, in a plane that, by some miracle, hasn't exploded. His base at Rabaul is over 600 miles away, an 8-hour flight over the open ocean, blind, bleeding to death, in a machine that could burst into flames from the next hit. He survived, but his story became a terrifying revelation. Horikoshi's genius had created the perfect fighter, but had forgotten the man inside. And this was only the most obvious crack in the legend's shining armor. What about its sting? The two fearsome 20mm cannons. Their shells left the barrel with a lazy, low muzzle velocity. At a distance, they followed a steep, unpredictable arc. This was a weapon for point-blank range, a shotgun, not a sniper rifle. The slightest miscalculation, and the precious rounds, enough for only 7 seconds of fire, vanished into empty air. But the Zero's most treacherous enemy hid in its heart, in the carburetor of its Sakai engine. If a pilot pushed the stick forward sharply to enter a dive, the plane would choke. Negative G-forces. The engine would stall, and for a few endless seconds, the fighter would become a silent glider. For enemy pilots, this discovery became the key to survival. Can't outturn a Zero? Dive away. He can't follow. And finally, the silence. The same silence in which the Japanese aces fought. It was not just a choice, but a necessity. The Type 96 radios were so unreliable, heavy, and filled with static from the engine that they were often simply removed. The pilots became lone wolves, masters of individual combat. But war is not the sum of duels. It's the work of a pack, and the Japanese pack was mute. So, the picture becomes clear. Here, we have a perfect duelist, incredibly agile, but ready to explode from a single spark, deadly up close, but helpless at a distance. The king of the turning fight, but a coward in a dive. A machine flown by a brilliant loner who could hear nothing but the roar of his own engine. Perfection turned out to be fragile, and the enemy was already starting to find the tools to shatter it. Only one question remained, and it would soon be answered. At what point does a brilliant creation, designed to elevate a warrior, become a simple tool of his inevitable sacrifice? June 4th, 1942. The eyes of the world are fixed on one point on the map, Midway Atoll. There, in fire and thunder, the fate of the war in the Pacific is being decided. But sometimes, history turns not in the epicenter of the storm, but in the absolute icy silence thousands of miles to the north, where the Aleutian Islands pierce the leaden waters of the Bering Sea. Here, in the fog, a separate diversionary battle is underway, and in this sky flies an aircraft with the serial number 4593. At the controls is not a legendary ace, just Petty Officer First Class Tadayoshi Koga, a 19-year-old kid from the carrier Ryujo. His Zero is mortally wounded. American bullets have severed an oil line. The pressure is dropping. The Sakai engine begins to sputter, its steady hum replaced by a cough and a death rattle. Koga and his two wingmen break off from the fight. The only mission now is to survive. Below is Akutan Island, an inhospitable, deserted piece of land. But Koga sees what looks like salvation, a smooth, green meadow, a perfect place for an emergency belly landing. This was the order for all Zero pilots in such a situation. Land with the gear up to minimize damage to the priceless machine. But Koga makes a different decision. Perhaps he hoped until the last moment he could take off again. Perhaps he simply made a mistake. He lowers the landing gear. His wingmen watch in horror as this fragile masterpiece, this celestial blade, glides smoothly toward the earth. A perfect approach. Touchdown. And in that instant, The green meadow reveals itself as a trap. It's not grass. It's a boggy marsh. The wheels instantly sink into the soft, treacherous ground. The plane, like a stumbling runner, pitches forward violently and performs a slow, almost surreal somersault. And again, silence. The other two Zeros circle the crash site, expecting their leader to climb out of the cockpit. But he doesn't appear. 5 minutes. 10. They know the protocol. They are supposed to destroy the damaged plane so it doesn't fall into enemy hands. But they can't. It's their comrade's plane. Disobeying orders, they turn and fly away, leaving the inverted Zero with its red suns on the wings, lying alone. A week passed, then another, and another. For nearly a month, the Ghost with serial number 4593 lay in the Akutan marsh, unseen by the world. And then, on July 10th, it was spotted. The crew of an American PBY Catalina flying boat scouting the area saw the impossible, a nearly intact Zero, the very same fighter that was a myth to them, a devil, an invincible samurai, and there it lay, helpless, belly up. A race against time began. The recovery operation became a tense thriller. The island was uninhabited, the nearest base far away. Soldiers, sinking waist-deep in freezing mud, spent weeks trying to extract the plane. Tractors got stuck, equipment broke. But retreat was not an option. This was more than a trophy. This was Pandora's box, opened, the key to unlocking all of the enemy's secrets. Finally, at the end of July, it was pulled onto solid ground and loaded onto a barge. When the body of 19-year-old Tadayoshi Koga was recovered from the cockpit, it was clear he had died instantly from a broken neck. He wasn't killed in combat. He was killed by a mistake, made in the final seconds of a flight in a plane that forgave no mistakes. The journey south, to California, was long. From the cold fog of Alaska to sunny San Diego, what arrived at Naval Air Station North Island wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a legend. Captured, but ready to talk. The ghost of Akutan Island had come home. And soon, it would tell all its secrets. From the cold mud of Alaska to the relentless sun of California. The Akutan ghost stood in a hangar at Naval Air Station North Island, and it was the surrender of a legend. It wasn't repaired. It was dissected. Every screw, every rivet, every panel of that top-secret duralumin was studied under the engineer's scalpel and the analyst's gaze. The myth of the invincible samurai lay on the operating table, but the true secrets of metal and wire could only be unlocked by one person, a pilot. September 20th, 1942. Lieutenant Commander Eddie O'Hare, an ace, a hero, climbs into the cockpit of the captured prize. To start the Sakai engine is to hear the enemy's voice. To take this machine into the air is to ride a tamed dragon. And in the first few minutes of flight, the dragon was obedient. It danced. Light, responsive, it anticipated the pilot's every wish. O'Hare understood why his comrades had died. In this dance of death, the Zero was the perfect partner. But the test was just beginning. O'Hare pushed the stick forward, building speed. 250 miles per hour, 280, 300. And then, something happened. The stick, which had been light as a feather, suddenly felt as if it were filled with lead. An attempt to roll was met with a lazy, stubborn resistance. The light-winged butterfly was turning into a clumsy iron bull before his eyes. O'Hare had found its Achilles heel. At speeds over 300 miles per hour, the Zero lost its greatest advantage. It ceased to be an extension of the pilot's body and became just a machine. A heavy, predictable machine. And then, the dive. All those terrible stories from the front lines about the choking engine, were confirmed in a blood-chilling reality. A sharp push forward on the stick, and the engine fell silent for a moment. That second, that hesitation, was enough. The enemy could escape. Discoveries piled up one after another, but knowing a weakness is not yet victory. How do you turn that knowledge into a weapon? The answer came not from the hangar, but from a chalkboard. Another pilot, Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thach, didn't just fly. He thought. He drew diagrams, arranged matches on a table, replaying again and again the hopeless fight of his clumsy F4F Wildcat against the Japanese virtuoso. He realized trying to outplay the Zero at its own game was suicide. So he had to change the rules. And he did. Thus was born the Thach Weave, a tactic brilliant in its simplicity, like a deadly dance. Two American fighters fly as a pair. When they spot an attacking Zero, they turn sharply towards each other, crossing paths. The Japanese pilot on one of their tails is forced to make a choice. And whatever choice he makes, for a split second, he exposes his flank to the guns of the second American. The duel became a trap. Individual skill was shattered by teamwork. Reports landed on admirals' desks. Recommendations flew to every flight deck and airfield in the Pacific. They were as simple as the commandments of a new gospel. Never try to dogfight a Zero. At speeds below 300 miles per hour, roll and dive away. Always fight in pairs. The legend was dead. The myth was dispelled. In the hands of American pilots, there was no longer just an airplane. There was a manual, a detailed instruction guide on how to kill the devil. And soon, in the skies over the Coral Sea and Midway Atoll, this knowledge would be tested by blood. The era of the lone samurai was ending. The age of the wolf pack was dawning. Knowledge is a weapon, and the manual on how to kill the devil, written after the autopsy of the Akutan ghost, became the deadliest weapon in the Pacific. Now, seeing that thin, elegant silhouette in the distance, an American pilot no longer felt primal terror. He felt the thrill of the hunt. He knew the rules of the new game. Don't turn. Don't engage in the deadly carousel of a dogfight. Instead, full throttle, stick forward, and a vertical dive, where the fragile Zero simply couldn't follow without risking breaking apart or stalling its temperamental engine. The Thach Weave transformed from a theory on a chalkboard into a ruthless geometry in the sky. Japanese aces, accustomed to chivalrous one-on-one duels, suddenly found themselves in a crossfire. Their individual mastery, their samurai valor, was shattered against the cold, calculated pragmatism of the wolf pack. But instructions and tactics were only half the answer. The other half was metal. Heavy, armored, furious American metal. Monsters rose to the decks of the aircraft carriers. New machines, born in the fire of defeat and designed with one single purpose, to exterminate the Zero. First came the Grumman F6F Hellcat. If its predecessor, the Wildcat, was a stubborn street brawler, the Hellcat was a heavyweight champion. It didn't try to dance. It charged straight ahead. An armored cockpit, self-sealing tanks, and the monstrous power of a 2,000 horsepower engine. It was everything the Zero was not. Heavy, durable, and forgiving of mistakes. American engineers seem to have taken the list of the Japanese fighters' strengths and done the exact opposite. And it worked. It was followed by the chance-fought F4U Corsair, with its inverted gull wing, like a bird of prey, and the most powerful engine ever fitted to a fighter. The Corsair was so fast, it could simply choose whether to fight or not. It would strike from a dive and be gone before the Zero pilot even knew what happened. The samurai's celestial blade had met a flying sledgehammer. The balance of power didn't just shift, It collapsed. In the first year of the war, the loss ratio was 12-1 in Japan's favor. By 1944, the numbers had flipped with a monstrous, mirror-like precision. Now, for every one American plane shot down, 10 or even 15 Zeros were destroyed. The skies over the Pacific had become a giant shooting gallery. In Nagoya and Ota, at the Mitsubishi and Nakajima factories, engineers frantically tried to save their masterpiece. They understood. Their brilliant creation was obsolete. And a race began. A race against time, against enemy technology, and against the very philosophy of the Zero. The first attempt was the A6M III, nicknamed HAMP by the Americans. They clipped its wings, removing the folding tips and reducing the wingspan by a full meter. The idea was simple. Sacrifice a bit of the legendary low-speed maneuverability to improve the roll rate and handling at high speeds, precisely where its Achilles heel lay. But it was like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. Then came the most produced model, the A6M V. It was the last, desperate attempt to breathe life into the aging design. The wing skin was strengthened to allow the airframe to withstand a faster dive. The Sakai engine was boosted with a new exhaust system that provided a tiny increase in speed. But the fundamental, fatal flaws remained. The same paper-thin construction with no armor. The same fuel tanks, ready to ignite from a single spark. They were trying to sharpen an old sword, while the enemy had arrived with a machine gun. The light-winged hunter, the master of the skies, had finally become the prey. Now, its pilots took off not for glory. They took off to die. Their beautiful, perfect fighter had become their coffin. And the question was no longer whether they could win. The question was how many seconds they would live after encountering the enemy. The era of dominance had been replaced by the era of sacrifice. The war was lost. It was lost in the skies over the Coral Sea, in the factories of Grumman and Vought, on the chalkboards of tactical centers. The Japanese pilots knew it. The admirals knew it. The engineers, desperately trying to sharpen their old blade, knew it best of all. The era of sacrifice, which began in the hopeless battles against the Hellcats, demanded a new, terrifying ritual. And this engineering masterpiece, born for triumph, was chosen for the role of the ultimate sacrificial lamb. October 25th, 1944. Leyte Gulf. In the cockpit of his A6M V sits 23-year-old Lieutenant Yukio Seki. He is not a fanatic. In his last letter, he wrote that he was flying not for the Emperor, but to protect those he loved. His aircraft is no longer a fighter. It is a projectile. A 250-kilogram bomb is strapped beneath the fuselage. But the real warhead is the plane itself. All of its fatal vulnerabilities, its paper armor and its tanks ready to burst into flame, now became its greatest strengths. The lightweight construction, stripped of everything unnecessary, allowed it to carry a deadly payload, and the complete lack of pilot protection ensured that he would not turn away at the last moment. Seki's flight of 5 Zeros breaks through a wall of anti-aircraft fire. Their target is the escort carrier USS St. Lo. This is no longer a dance, not a duel. It is a straight, relentless, one-way flight. Seki guides his machine through the shell bursts, through the tracer rounds searching for his unprotected fuel tanks. He smashes into the flight deck. 30 minutes later, the carrier, engulfed in flames, will capsize and sink, taking more than 100 lives with it. The divine wind, the kamikaze, had proven its monstrous effectiveness, and the gates of hell swung wide open. What began as a gesture of desperation became a conveyor belt of death. Nearly 2,000 Zero fighters were thrown into these attacks, Nearly 2,000 young pilots took to the sky in a machine designed for aerial victory, only to become its final, living component. The perfect fighter had become the perfect suicide weapon. August 1945. Nagoya. The Mitsubishi and Nakajima factories are still running. The last Zero rolls off the assembly line. All around are the ruins of a bombed-out country. The emperor is already preparing to announce the surrender. But the workers, driven by the inertia of war, paint the last red suns on the wings. They were building a plane with nowhere left to fly, a weapon for a war that was already over. In its perfect lines, in its lightweight airframe, the entire tragedy of Japan was frozen. The journey from arrogant confidence in its technological genius to a fanatical devotion to sacrifice, ready to consume both machine and man. The samurai's celestial blade, which first became a coffin, ended its journey as a funeral pyre. And the ultimate question left by its story hangs in the air, like smoke over the ruins of Hiroshima. At what exact moment did this brilliant creation, designed to elevate a warrior, turn into a simple instrument of his inevitable sacrifice? Thus ends the story of the celestial blade, born from a dream of perfection. It was created as the highest expression of a designer's will and a pilot's skill, but it became a silent witness to how technological triumph turns into human tragedy. Its path, from absolute master of the skies to a sacrificial altar, is the story not just of an airplane, but of an idea pushed to its merciless limit. Where is the line beyond which a brilliant creation ceases to serve man and begins to dictate its own fatal will? And what is more terrifying, to create an imperfect weapon, or to create a weapon so perfect in its narrow task that it leaves its final owner with no choice but self-sacrifice? This is a conversation that goes beyond history and aerodynamics. Share your thoughts on this paradox in the comments. We read everyone. And if this story made you think, support our work with a like and subscribe so we can continue to tell the stories of grand designs and their great tragedies.